So thank you all for coming. It's our great pleasure to moderate this panel. There is probably no need to present our speakers, but let's remind you quickly their main investments in the environment sector. First, starting with Bruno Candes. Bruno, you're a partner at INFRADAY, and you recently led the acquisition of a majority stake in the Blue Phoenix Group, a waste recycling infrastructure company. Thierry Deo. Thierry, you're CEO and founder of Meridiam. Meridiam has invested in energy from waste projects in Spain, in Poland. You also invested in Evergas and Waga producing biogas. And more recently, you became a leading player in the environment sector with the acquisition of Suez alongside other investors. Guillaume Farou. Guillaume, your partners at Vauban. Vauban has invested in district heating in Italy, Norway, and the US. You also acquired a stake in the energy services company ProxyServe and more recently Paprec. And Benjamin Frémaux, you are CEO of IDEX in 2020. IDEX is a major operator in the district heating and energy services in France, and you're also active in Belgium and Lithuania. Over to you, Julien.
Yeah. When we have decided to organize this panel, we were not anticipating that the theme of circular economy will make the headline during the summer. This was particularly the case for water, but not only. We are noticing profound changes in the environment segment, where operators which used to be remunerated on pure volume sold are now transforming themselves as manager of the resources along the cycle. Before entering this particular field, we cannot avoid discussing briefly the impact of the current geopolitical and economical environment. Perhaps starting with Benjamin, one of the most pressing questions, are we going to have some heat during this winter? And how is the impact of the gas crisis at IDEX?
I think the answer was given on the previous panel, and the answer for this winter is yes, hopefully, thanks to NG and others. Basically, because our storage are full, and for IDEX we use the storage, and we have full capacity for the winter starting now. The question will be, as already said, for next winter, and how we will be able to store gas not coming from Russia. For IDEX, maybe a word about IDEX, because it's a small company and we are not big players like Meridiam, Vauban, and others. IDEX is a mid-sized company. We are 5,000 people in France, 2 billion euros turnover, and our specialty is green heat all along the value chain, and we are the only players in France active in energy from waste, biomass, methanization, district heating and cooling networks. This is our core business, and energy services, building infrastructures. The impact to answer your question, Julien, the impact of the gas crisis for us is a lot of risks and a lot of opportunities. Some risk because part of our mix is gas, and of course, even if we are pass-through and we are real infrastructure players and we have real infrastructure assets, still you need a client to pay, and we see a bigger risk today with customers not able to pay because of this big increase. Of course, we benefit from the tariff shield, bouclier tarifaire, that has been put in place by the French government, same all across Europe, and it will ease this issue for the next winter. But the question is, because it's so expensive for the government and for the French government as well, we are talking about 30 billion euros this year, 45 billion euros next year for electricity, gas and fuel tariff shields. The question is, what's next? And what's next, for me, this is the opportunity part of my answer. Of course, we have shifted to green years or decades ago within IDEX, delivering green heat to cities and to industrial players. most of our selling pitch was based on energy transition, decarbonization, fight for climate change, fight against climate change. And of course, some early adopters were convinced it was a way forward, but price was the leading factor for change. And today, obviously, my job is easier because everybody has understood that we need to move and move fast to replace fossil fuels, gas mainly, by other type of fuels. And what we do, energy from waste, solid derived fuel, for instance, combustible solide de récupération, methanization, biomass. This is what we sell and what we have sold for decades. So it's far more easier today than it was before.
Yeah, maybe a question to all of you on the circular economy and when it becomes, when you started to focus on this and what's the impact on ESG and EU taxonomy on your recent investment, and maybe that's an opportunity also to highlight the key reasons of your recent investment in the environment sectors, starting with you, Thierry, if it's fine for you.
Thank you. I mean, the circular economy for us has been a focus for the past 10 years. I would say in the preparation of COP21, we've realized there was a real opportunity for investment in terms of really reaching our sustainability goals. So with, I mean, all the assets that you've mentioned are actually built and operating for quite a few years for that reason. So, I mean, we saw biogas as a real opportunity. Obviously, this crisis is helping biogas because now, actually, when you think about the regulator and others, they're actually doing everything possible to try to replace the lack of gas from Russia, but it's going to take time. But again, biogas is faster in terms of development than the nuclear power. So we may have a chance there. We can grow capacity in 5 years rather than 10 or 15. So, but the focus on in the circular economy has been for us a journey. So it started with the energy side, then the waste to energy side, and then eventually the water, which is quite a critical thing. So our last acquisition with Suez was really to complete the full sort of area of the circular economy. And when we see the water crisis this summer, things like really dealing with the resource, dealing with the groundwater tables and refueling groundwater tables that Suez have been doing for quite a number of years become very critical services that we have to provide. So I can't say I've always been convinced about the circular economy as a good investment business, but now it's becoming even better.
And Bruno, if you want to.
What it does brought in circular economy investment value. I suppose we are a value-add investor. We are here to create value, and it's been our mantra from the very first day of INFRADAY is that creating value and delivering value to our investor does not contradict with fundamental ESG ambition. So the first and foremost is about value. We've done, industrial water investment back 15 years ago. The most recent one is quite interesting. I like to highlight it because it resonates very well with the previous panel actually around minerals and metals and how do we move as we move towards energy transition and electrification, what does that mean for our global supply chain? So we've invested in a business called Blue Phoenix Group, which essentially is really straightforward from a technology standpoint. We are taking incinerator bottom ashes from EFW plants, and we are basically processing them to extract aggregate that can be recycled into construction materials, depending on jurisdiction. Ferrous materials, which we can sell into the local scrap market. And more importantly, again, back to the previous panel, copper, aluminium, and minerals. So evidently, we like that business, and we believe it's very virtuous because evidently on the supply side, it's highly regulated. You know, we are trying to ban landfill across EU, less and less, more and more EFW treatment. As a result, we are trying to limit the final usage of landfill post incineration. So all of that is evidently driving demand. But probably the most not contrarian, but unique view or left field view on the business is what we do with the metal and minings. And we have taken the view at INFRADAY that, you know, with electrification, I mean, just to understand, I mean, an onshore wind power takes probably 4 times more copper than a nuclear power plant on a per megawatt install basis. If you apply that to offshore wind, that becomes 10x. The same apply for aluminium and copper for EV vehicle compared to thermal vehicle. So the fundamental conviction on our side is we are moving from a carbon-driven economy to a metals and minerals-driven economy. If you believe that, and if you apply seriously carbon pricing across the supply chain, basically meaning that you are creating a premium to recycle products, essentially creating and investing in this massive infrastructure to recycle that and being able to fuel back, build some resiliency into the supply chain, as well as bringing the carbon footprint of all of this lower, becomes a no-brainer. So it's not only doing good as from a pure ESG point of view, but it's also, we believe, on the long term, it provides a very interesting premium to inflation for our portfolio. So that's what we've been doing, and I was very interested to hear the word of the government, you know, trying to rebuild that supply chain as well. And I think recycling and being able to extract from our waste this type of minerals is equally important. And evidently, if we fast forward that in 10 years or 20 years, the same evidently will apply to lithium and nickel as we will move into the next gen of battery manufacturing, which is recycling the first gen of batteries. So this is here to stay.
A little word about SDGs and taxonomy, as you wanted to mention that at Vauban, or that is core of our investment policy. Obviously, it's fully integrated into everything we do, basically. So circular economy, in a way, I think was already present and implemented in many public projects that we worked upon and invested, be that, for example, earth renewals and so on. And then we've been looking at the waste sector in particular for some time. And when you think about the waste sector, essential service for the community, obviously. If waste collection disappears, everyone's going to notice it very quickly in that room. Then, as just said by Bruno, there's much value to be found in recycling first, and everyone wants those landfills to disappear. So besides and before incineration, recycling of many materials is possible. And again, as said, incineration, and in particular refuse-derived fuel incineration, is going to be to bring a lot of possibilities. Obviously, both in terms of reducing landfill volumes, but also in supplying much needed baseload energy that we are all craving at the time being.
Yeah, prior to the energy crisis, waste was considered quite as what we see in French parent pauvre by the legislation in countries, and most importantly by EU Commission. Do you see a change in perception at those entities?
I don't think there's a revolution yet, let's be honest with it. If you think about the Commission, they still think that energy from waste is a terrible thing. The taxonomy shows the complexity about being compliant with this type of projects. On the other end, as I was mentioning earlier, there is a real push for biogas in general, so from waste or from agricultural waste or other. So in a way, it will still be fairly complex. I don't think we'll have the revolution of the waste becoming the big thing in Europe tomorrow. But little by little, I think we'll get to a number of subsectors being promoted if the Commission and our member states end up realizing what the benefits can be. But it may take longer than you think. I think the crisis actually is probably has been a better enhancer of the biogas than the taxonomy itself. The taxonomy, as much as it is a good thing, it's something rather rigid that needs to be seen in an evolving environment, and that's actually why we don't consider the taxonomy sufficient to address sustainability or ESG or SDGs. That's why we implement our own complementary sort of impact measurement from a positive side, because the taxonomy is still based on the do no harm. So, and the do no harm is something that is always going to be complicated with waste, because
but I think, to complete your answer, Thierry, I think things are changing from the bottom. On the ground, you have people understanding that an energy from waste plant, or a new plant, for instance, can provide very cheap energy, heat for housing, heat for an industrial plant for 20 years. And it helps also lower the cost of treatment. So before, energy from waste was seen as an alternative to landfills. Today, it is seen as energy production. And as explained already by Thierry, when you need energy like crazy, of course, this is part of the solution, and it's coming from the ground.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, as we all know, the roads to hell are paved with good intention, and the big problem today with taxonomy is the very static, if not rigid, nature of it as of today, and probably that from the ground up effect needs to arrive in Brussels. A few examples, I mean, the fact that EFW, to Thierry's point, is not considered being taxonomy compliant is a big question mark. The same would be argued that, you know, biogas maybe, but we all know that the water footprint of creating biogas with crops is difficult. So it's highly complex. I'm sure you have an objection to that here, and I'm happy to discuss.
You can do it with agricultural waste, no crops.
Yeah, but then not at the volumes we are targeting, and then you need cows, and you will have another problem, as we all know. So it is complex, and you cannot. There is no one size fits all and one easy fix to that, because it is very intertwined and imbricated. And we have seen the recent debate around taxonomy about nuke, and there was even an article this morning suggesting that one of the big French think tank is opposing gas to be part of the taxonomy. The big picture is, again, road to health are paved with good intention. The intent of taxonomy is perfectly valid. It's virtuous. It's to channel savings and economy towards net zero objective. That no one would ever discuss that. It's the road to do it, and the transition to it that we believe is important and needs to be funded. Because if you say that, and if you take all of institutional money and bank capital in particular, moving away from this, you will be left with some sectors that are highly critical today in infrastructure, but not only. Think of defense, for example, that will not be funded and that will not have the financial resources to fund their next cycle. And I can invite you to read an article of the CEO of Thales in Les Echos last week about the impact of taxonomy on Thales. It's extremely important. So again, no one would ever argue on the long-term objective. It's the transition to it, and how do we do that? And that can be lost on the way. And that's the biggest risk, is to be squeezed and to be at the risk of being slightly controversial, as usual in Europe, to be a little bit naive and being squeezed between the tree and the barn. The tree and the barn.
Maybe just to add a little on that, there would be a lot to say about stranded assets, which should not be stranded, but I don't think that's the very topic of that discussion. But just wanted to elaborate on the fact that yes, taxonomy is very demanding on the one hand, but on the other hand, there are other regulations which are pushing for the sectors and subsectors we are discussing about, in particular loi NOTRe in France, which is obviously going to étendre les consignes de tri, so increase the demand of sorting centers. And at the end of the day, it's going to bring huge volumes, which will be available for biogas production and methanization from organic waste, basically, and not from the crops. So that's really a key area of growth for Paprac, as an example, which won the bigger project in France launched by Sictom recently under a concession scheme. And again, as said, besides these regulations at the very local level, it's under the hand of collectivities, basically, and communities, and some of them are extremely pushy towards actually valuing, reducing waste and valuing the remainder, so that we globally avoid to depend on energy and commodities from which come from potentially very long far away.
Yeah, Bruno, you mentioned the capex to come. In many European countries, water reuse is just at prototype phase. The green production of district heating is still underdeveloped. So do you think that we are in front of a major wall of capex investment? And do you think it will be affordable for the end users, so we'll find other ways to finance them?
Well, I will defer to my good friend Thierry to comment on the water capex, because he's made some very bold public announcement on that. But certainly, energy transition and electrification, which are the two topics that we're talking about here, are massively capex intensive. It's a change in generation, in technological generation, and that requires massive investment, which on top of bottleneck supply chain will create additional inflation pressure, as we heard from the economist earlier today. So, I mean, EFW, for example, if we look at the current permitted or announced plans, and if you cross that with the projected growth of municipal waste volumes, we will need probably 50 megaton a year of capacity by 2030, which we will not have. So there will be a gap. Roughly, that's probably 80 plants across Europe, like the one we're having in Saint-Ouen, which is one of the biggest one in the country. So if you say these are probably twice the size of the regular size, maybe Benjamin knows better than us, that's probably 150 plants that are going to miss by 2030. So we would need massive investment. And back to my previous point, if taxonomy is diverting capital from this investment, that will become a constraint, because we know local government, municipalities will have difficulty to fund that.
No, I'm optimistic about the ability to fund and finance this, because in a way people sort of talk up in the air, because most people don't even know how much they pay for their water. At least in France, it's probably the cheapest water in Europe.
Ireland is free.
Yeah, well, it won't be free for long. It was also free in Japan, and then they decided they need to make people. But it's, I think, and this will challenge the French system in particular, that went into service contracts versus long-term concession with investment, to go back to the ability to amortize those investments on long-term periods. I mean, if you have a 30-year or 40-year concessions, you can make major investments and keep it affordable for the end user on a daily basis. But of course, this will require a real change in the way that all the municipalities and all those involved are seeing things. So I think in the reuse, which is not only water, because in a way we're also talking about waste, but there is actually a reuse directive in Europe that pushes you to avoid waste. So because you avoid tons of CO2 when you avoid waste, and there are a number of solutions that are being developed, including digital platforms that allow you to trade for free all kinds of items that eventually don't go to to the trash, and then you can actually calculate the number of tons of CO2 avoided with this. So we shouldn't forget that reducing waste is also the first step. It's part of the game. It's not only just the waste that we have to treat, and hopefully we don't need another 120 EFW plant, but we can find other ways to deal with it. On the district heating, I think the trend is perhaps much stronger than we realize. I mean, most of you mentioned we're investing in Poland. It's clearly to green their district heating, but we're also doing that in 3 or 4 universities, cities in the US. It's a very big trend, and people can afford it. But of course, they look at this on a 30, 50-year basis. They don't look at this major investment as a 12-year or 8-year little French concession thing.
And maybe just to add on that, yes, a considerable amount of capex is needed in those sectors. May that be urban heating networks, waste management, and water management as well. So obviously, on the other side, we need very long-term finance as well. So liquidity is still here at the time being. It's obviously more expensive than it was 6 months or a year ago, but it's still there. So as investors and as bankers, we need to obviously to commit to those projects and those industry over the very long term. And I think on the operator side, it will be key to invest those amounts and deploy that capex in an exemplary manner, because it will be the clear condition to keep their license to operate for those companies and those projects, because obviously the customers and the citizen at the end of the day is not going to be able to afford super high increase of water prices and or waste treatment prices, because at the end of the day, which is paid by tax. So I think the requirements for all those sectors and all actors are going to be stringent.
Yeah, maybe from a IDEX perspective, and just to give you rough numbers, within 5 years, we have more than tripled our investments on such projects: energy from waste, methanization, district heating and cooling. And I think the situation is quite specific between the different sectors. In France, energy from waste is a pretty much mature market with old plants that need to be replaced. In the district heating and cooling networks sector, everything needs to be done, at least in France, if we want to catch up the Northern Europe. What is very interesting in terms of price, because I hear a lot of capex needs to be deployed and it will cost a lot to the end customers. Just to give you an example of what we have done for our last energy from waste project. Having a very high energy production, heat and electricity, we were able to lower the price to the end consumer because of the global economy of the project. And I think this is also changing a lot the economy of the projects we are talking about. And I guess for Paprec, for Suez, you have the same. If you can sell byproducts to the market at a higher price, of course the project, the main project will be easier to finance.
Indeed, and maybe just to rebound on that, those kind of installation, we expect them to move away gradually from a gate fee-based tariffication and business model towards actually, yes, a valuation of their own products. And that's why we believe our investment in Paprec is very consistent. It's because having control over the supply and the upstream is extremely important for us, and it's compliant with the fact that we are investors over the very long term, 25 years. So we expect that to be sustainable.
Yeah, to finance this project, how the development on green and sustainable finance can contribute? Thierry, you want to give some your experience?
I mean, it's It's somehow the other way around. The more green things we build, the more finance comes to it. So green and sustainable finance doesn't exist on its own, but joke aside, I think there is a real trend which is driven by the regulation anyway, between SFDR and all of us, to drive finance into things that are greener with the taxonomy, with other things, with sort of more responsible KPIs towards this. And this is actually a good thing, because what is changing is the risk-reward equation is seen from a different perspective, because you're including the social and environmental risk, but you're also including the social and environmental benefits to your risk-reward equation. So in a way, perhaps it's just a trend right now, but lenders, in a way, I find them less risk-adverse when it comes to this type of asset class, and with sustainable finance and this sort of more comprehensive risk assessment and benefit assessment. So there is more liquidity coming to this sector, which is a good thing. I mean, as Bruno says, I don't think, Bruno, that all of it will come there, so you don't have to worry about defense. But enough will come to be able to support it.
I mean, regulation policymakers are channeling savings and institutional capital and bank capital towards energy transition, towards green, and that's a good thing for sure. What we are seeing from the ground, green financing, green bond, I think is not enough, if I'm honest. I think KPIs we are still in the very early days, like when we were doing quality insurance when I was a very young engineer, and I don't think this is enough. It's not embedded enough into the credit analysis, the underwriting process. KPIs are weak, so I think we should do better. I think it's good to attract liquidity for the reason we've just discussed. Is it good enough or ambitious enough to really help the companies that we finance to accelerate towards energy transition? Possibly not, if we are brutally honest.
No, but just to add on that, I think what is missing is a transition taxonomy. So we have to invent it, because Brussels is not going to do it. But there is room for this within the financial sector to actually focus on the brown to green finance. And I think by doing it, we will eventually get it into the regulation.
Yeah, but it would be good to come with idea. You know, the Americans, they like to say, you know, when you don't innovate, you regulate, right? So let's not regulate. Let's try to come up with ideas, and let's do our own transition, and let's build up for ourselves, for the investment communities, the tools to do it.
Yeah, maybe just adding that, as previously working in an industrial, I was always convinced that yes, you're not going to change a project or an asset by just imposing covenants or in a credit contract. However, I think that in the long run, if you properly develop KPI and spend times looking at the right indicators and at the right levers that you can actually action, I think you can have things evolved either even as a, obviously I think more as an investor and shareholder than as a lender, but still I think you can push sectors, firms and projects toward better practices and better operation standards.
And for IDEX, as I said, we don't have any financing issues, and thanks to the help of NATIXIS, I must say, this has not been a topic of discussion, but I must admit that recently, because green financing is also part of the marketing of a company like ours, we are thinking a lot more about this way of financing the company, and it pushes us to move forward with a lot of ESG standards to meet and so on. For the moment, it's only marketing, but it could be much more than that in the future.
Yeah, but
I don't think it's marketing at NATIXIS, by the way. We should
Marketing for IDEX as we are finance already.
We should ground them.
I hope your compliance officer is not in the room, because...
No, joke aside, I think when we're talking about transition, not to overserve our host here, but the principle of rating rather than being black and white that NATIXIS uses for their allocation and their capital charge is a quite interesting one, because I think it fits the idea of transition rather than green or black.
Yeah, I like the idea of a capital charge against carbon footprint, for example. I think it's probably a more transitional way to do it rather than pure you can do it or not do it. And this type of green financing, when your penalty, if you're not reaching your KPIs, is 5 basis points, when over the last 2 months we've taken 200 basis points of interest rate increase. Is that changing the needle? Not really. But making sure that a carbon-intensive asset is paying more Tier 1 capital from the banks, I think is a good idea, certainly. More, because it addresses the transition element.
Yeah, a last question on technology. You mentioned before, the environment sector has always been seen as a labor-intensive industry. How the use of data and technology has been incorporated in your business plan, and how you see the impact of data and technology on the sector?
I mean, I think just for good reasons, I will never oppose labor-intensive versus technology, because there are lots of unions. No, but and I don't think that's the right way of seeing it. I think when you focus your technology on improving service for clients, if you take the water sector, having smart meters and all these different things, people actually know what they consume. You can pick up where the leaks are and all these different things. It's really improving in a major way the service for the users without necessarily reducing the number of people. Yes, some, because you don't have people going around houses to check meters anymore, but those are actually somewhere else, because you move the service in a different direction, but that doesn't necessarily result, it does sometimes, in a reduction of labor force.
Yeah, I mean, I would not... for us, technology and energy transition are not opposed. There is no energy transition without technology, to the point that at INFRADAY we have raised a tech fund, which we believe is highly complementary to an infrastructure strategy. For sure, there is tons of things. I think quite bizarrely, the sector is a bit late when it comes to technology. Energy, in particular, is a little bit late when it comes to technology. If you think of what micro-curtailment, micro-grid management, everything around IoTs. If we look at, we used to own a smart meter business. They weren't very smart. They had only one merit, is to be individual, so people were paying their bills as opposed to the housing community buying it. So there's hundreds of things that can be there, and we need to roll up the sleeve and do it, because I think we're dragging a little bit behind when it comes to energy compared to other sectors like finance, e-commerce, and so on, where logistics, where fantastic things have been done, and I think we're still lagging behind a bit on the energy transition tech.
I must admit that I fully agree with Bruno on that point.
Not necessarily bad,
No, but it's even good and challenging. We are at IDEX. We are an old company. We will turn 60 next year, and I must admit that in terms of technology, we are not very far advanced. We start to innovate and to partner with small companies, and we will enter the smart metering business this year, because we think that, and we'll do that in partnership with some tech startups. We are a development company. We are a good platform, but we are not a very good R&D platform. This is where we need also on-the-shelf technologies to push on gasification, for instance, smart metering, stuff like that, EV charging. We have the customers, we have the financing, we have the project development capabilities. We are technology users. We are technology users and not technology developers.
Yeah, I think when you look at the tech, the biggest, not problem, but the way investors look at tech is through scalability, and they typically tech investors don't like hardware, and evidently in infrastructure and energy in particular, tech is a combination of software plus hardware, and that's a big hurdle for massive investment. Tech investors like software, so when they have a product that is based, they can scale it up at virtually zero cost, but for the cost of acquiring clients, and all of the revenues falls into profitability. Evidently, if you throw a hardware component to that, it's much more difficult, and that's probably one thing we can explore: infrastructure and tech hand in hand.
And maybe a last word about actual labor-intensive activities, because before tech. We talked a lot about smart metering. In the waste industry, you have a lot of people in sorting centers. That's clearly the challenge to address. Much less people in waste-to-energy facilities. And actually, technology deployment can help that. And it's already helping that. And it's part of the wall of CapEx we talked about previously. And I think that, yes, deploying more automated sorting and so on, it's costly, but it increases the rate of recycling in sorting centers. So it's very beneficial for everyone at the end of the day. And yes, B, you can redeploy people towards jobs which are much more rewarding and which can be done over the long terms. So I think it's very beneficial, and we are clearly supporting that.
Well, thank you very much to all of you. I think you deserve a great applause. Thank you.